The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 11 days before I finally moved it. Not threw it away, not framed it, just moved it to the top of the refrigerator where I wouldn't have to see it every time I walked past. A pale cream envelope with gold lettering. My granddaughter's name printed in that cursive font that costs extra. Inside, a card that said, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the graduation of Savannah Rose Mitchell." And below that, handwritten by my daughter-in-law in her careful, deliberate script, "Dinner to follow at Blackstone's. Reservation for 12. 12. I counted my family the way you do when something feels off, but you can't quite name it yet. My son, his wife, their 2 kids, her parents, her sister's husband, their kids, a cousin I'd met once at a barbecue 6 years ago, 12 people at that table, not 13. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am 63 years old. I have buried a husband, raised a son by myself after he left, worked 31 years as a claims adjuster for an insurance company in Columbus, Ohio, and I have never once in my adult life asked anyone to feel sorry for me. I don't say that to sound tough. I say it because I need you to understand the kind of woman I am. Before you hear what I'm about to tell you, I am not a woman who cries easily. But I stood at that refrigerator at 7 in the morning with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I felt something move through my chest that I hadn't felt since the week my husband's doctor called with the biopsy results. That particular kind of quiet that settles over you when the world rearranges itself into something you don't recognize. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here. Savannah was born on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of fall day where the light comes in sideways and turns everything amber. My son called me from the hospital and I drove 4 hours through the dark to be there by morning. I held her before she was an hour old. She had her grandfather's ears and her father's stubborn chin, and she looked at me with those unfocused newborn eyes, and I made her a silent promise the way grandmothers do. I will always show up for you. I kept that promise. When Savannah was 7 and had her tonsils out, I took 2 weeks of vacation to stay with her and her brother while their parents went back to work. I made her popsicles from scratch. I read her the same 3 picture books so many times I could recite them in my sleep, and sometimes I still do. When she started high school and decided she wanted to try competitive debate, I drove 6 hours round trip to watch her first tournament. She lost in the second round. She cried in the car. I bought her a milkshake and told her that losing was just practicing for winning, and by her junior year she placed 3rd at the state level. I was in the front row for that too. When she got into Kellerman University, a school that costs more per semester than I made in my first full year of working, I didn't hesitate. My son had called me nervous, stumbling over the words, explaining that they'd done the math, and even with financial aid and his wife's contributions, there was still a gap, about $14,000 a year. I said, "I'll cover it." Just like that, no conditions. No guilt. I had saved carefully my whole life. My house was paid off. My car was paid off. I had a modest retirement that I'd tended like a garden for 30 years. I could do this for her. Over 4 years, I wrote $56,000 in checks. I'm not telling you that to make anyone feel small. I'm telling you because it matters to the story, because you need to understand what I understood when I saw that envelope, that I had paid for the education being celebrated at a dinner I was not invited to. The graduation ceremony itself, I found out about that through Savannah's Instagram. She posted the details for her friends 2 weeks before anyone thought to mention it to me. I texted my son when I saw it. "When is family getting together for Savannah's graduation? I'd like to book my hotel." He texted back 4 hours later, "Mom, Patricia thought it would be better to keep the dinner small. Just immediate family." You understand. I read that text standing in the parking lot of a grocery store. A cart drifted past me in the wind. A child somewhere nearby was laughing. I stood there and read it 3 times because I kept waiting for it to mean something different. Just immediate family. I am his mother. I am Savannah's grandmother. I am Savannah's grandmother. I have been her family her entire life. I wrote back. I'm not sure I understand. Can you call me? He didn't call. He texted again, 20 minutes later. Patricia's family is flying in from out of town. It's already a lot of people. You know how she gets with logistics. It's not personal, Mom. Not personal. My son. The boy I raised alone on a claims adjuster's salary, the boy I stayed up with through ear infections and nightmares and a learning disability that 3 different teachers told me would hold him back. The boy I watched grow into a man I was proud of, sent me a text message telling me that being excluded from my granddaughter's graduation dinner was not personal. I put my phone in my purse. I got in my car. I drove home without buying anything. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer in my nightstand where I keep a small notebook, and I wrote down every amount I had ever paid for Savannah's education. Every check, every transfer, the date, the amount, all $56,000 of it, documented in my own hand. I didn't know why I was doing it. It just felt important to make it real on paper. Then I closed the notebook and went to sleep. The week after, I called my son. Not to argue. I want to be clear about that. I called because I still believed, the way mothers do, even when we shouldn't, that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, that if I just heard his voice, if we actually talked instead of texting, it would make sense. He answered on the second ring. Mom. Hey! He sounded tired, or maybe relieved. I still can't decide which. I told him calmly that I was having a hard time with the graduation situation, that I understood Patricia's family was coming, that I understood logistics were complicated, but that I had been Savannah's grandmother her whole life and I had contributed significantly to making this graduation possible, and it felt wrong to be excluded from celebrating it. There was a pause. Patricia feels like her family dynamics are different from yours, Mom. They're used to big gatherings together. She just thought it would be smoother if I wasn't there. Another pause. It's not about you. It's just easier. I want to tell you that I said something dignified, something wise, something that captured exactly how I felt in that moment. What I actually said was nothing. I said nothing for long enough that my son asked if I was still there, and I said yes. And then I said I had to go, and I hung up. I sat in my kitchen with the phone on the table in front of me. Easier. After 31 years of being whatever my son needed me to be, mother, babysitter, bank, cheerleader, homework helper, emergency contact, holiday host, I was now a logistical complication. Something to be smoothed away for the comfort of a woman who had been in this family for 8 years and had never once called to check on me. Not during my husband's illness, not after his funeral, not ever. I went to the drawer. I got the notebook, and I made a phone call. My son does not know this, but when Savannah started college, I set up a dedicated savings account to handle her tuition payments. I'd done it that way for the tax records, to keep it clean and separate. Every semester, I transferred the funds and then confirmed the payment. The account still had a small balance in it, not much, but enough. I called the bank. I'd like to close this account, I said, and transfer the remaining balance to my primary checking. The woman on the phone was efficient and kind. She confirmed the amount. She asked me to verify some information. Then she said, "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I thought about it. "Actually, yes," I said. "I'd like to change the secondary contact on my estate documents. Can you point me to the right department for that?" She pointed me to the right department. That took a little longer. There were forms. There was a notary involved. But 3 weeks before Savannah's graduation, I sat in a lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon and quietly, carefully updated my will for the first time in 6 years. I did not disinherit my son. I'm not that kind of person, and I don't believe in punishing people wholesale for their failures, but certain specific provisions that I had written with his family in mind. a college fund I had designated for his younger child, a sum I had earmarked for a future down payment. Those were redirected to my niece, who is putting herself through nursing school, to a scholarship fund at the university where I got my own degree 40 years ago. I didn't tell anyone, I just did it. Then I came home and I called my friend Harriet. Harriet and I have been friends since we were both 26 years old and working in the same building downtown. She's been divorced twice, has 3 adult children who adore her, and has the best laugh of anyone I have ever met in my life. A big, full-body thing that starts somewhere in her stomach. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you doing anything the weekend of the 14th? The 14th was the same weekend as the graduation dinner. I was going to stay home," I said. "No," she said, "you are not." Harriet had been planning a trip to Savannah, Georgia, the city, I mean, not my granddaughter, though I've always found that particular irony a little too on the nose, for her 65th birthday. She and 2 other women from our old office, Paulette and June, had rented a house near the historic district. 3 bedrooms, a porch with rocking chairs, a kitchen big enough to cook in. "We have an extra room," she said. "It has your name on it if you want it." I said I would think about it. I thought about it for approximately 45 seconds. "I want it," I said. I did not tell my son I was going. This is the part of the story where I have to be honest about something. Part of me, the petty part, the part I don't usually let out in public, wanted him to call during that weekend and hear me answer from somewhere that wasn't my kitchen. Wanted him to have some small moment of understanding that his mother was not sitting at home feeling sorry for herself. But the bigger part of me just wanted to go, just wanted to be somewhere that I was wanted, and to be with women who knew me before I was anybody's mother or grandmother or logistical complication. We drove down on a Friday. Harriet and I rode together, 5 hours with the music up and the windows cracked and gas station coffee that was terrible and perfect. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about our bodies getting older and how strange that is when your mind still feels 40. We talked about Harriet's youngest daughter's new apartment and Paulette's hip surgery and a book we'd both read that we had wildly different opinions about. We did not talk about my son, not once. We got to the house at 4:15. Paulette and June were already there. June had bought flowers for every room. Paulette had made a picture of something cold and sweet that I didn't ask too many questions about. The porch looked out over a cobblestone street with old live oaks and Spanish moss, and the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look like a painting. I sat down in one of those rocking chairs and I felt my shoulders drop. I had not realized how tightly I had been holding them. We spent 4 days in that city. We walked through the historic squares in the mornings while it was still cool. We ate at a restaurant where the shrimp and grits made Paulette close her eyes and say a small prayer of gratitude. We went to a museum and stood in front of a painting for a long time without talking, which is something I never do alone, but somehow felt easy with people who didn't need me to explain myself. On the second evening, we sat on the porch after dinner, and the conversation turned the way it does with women of a certain age, to children, to what we expected versus what we got, to the particular grief of loving someone who has become someone you don't entirely recognize. June's daughter hadn't spoken to her in 2 years over a misunderstanding that had calcified into something neither of them could seem to break through. Paulette's son was kind to her face and borrowed money he never paid back. Harriet talked about her eldest, who she described as present in body and absent in spirit at every family gathering. I told them about the envelope, about the text message, about not personal, Mom and easier. I told them about the notebook, about the phone call to the bank, about the lawyer's office. There was a silence. Then Harriet said quietly, "Good." June nodded. Paulette raised her glass. Nobody told me I had overreacted. Nobody told me to consider his perspective, or keep the peace, or remember that family is family. These women had watched me for decades. They knew what I had given and what I had absorbed and what I had swallowed without complaint. They just said good and meant it. I cried a little then. Not from sadness exactly. Something more complicated. Relief, maybe. The specific relief of being known. On the morning of the graduation dinner, the Saturday, the one where 12 people sat at a table in Columbus and celebrated my granddaughter's degree, I was standing on a riverbank in Georgia watching the sun come up over the water. Harriet stood beside me with her coffee. "How are you?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "I'm okay," I said. "I think I might actually be okay." She nodded. We stood there until the light changed. My son called that Sunday evening. I was on the highway, maybe 2 hours from home, Harriet driving while I watched the landscape change from flat to familiar. I let it go to voicemail. He left one. His voice was careful, practiced, the way it gets when he's delivering something he's rehearsed. "Mom, I just wanted to say that we missed you. Savannah asked about you. I don't know. I hope you had a good weekend. Call me when you get a chance." I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the seat and watched the road. I did not call him back that night. Not because I was punishing him. I want to be clear about that. I was simply not ready. There are conversations that require a particular kind of stillness to have, well, and I had not arrived at that stillness yet. I got home at 9:30. I unpacked slowly. I put the kettle on. I sat at my kitchen table with my tea and my reading glasses, and I looked at the space where that envelope had been. I had moved it. Then I'd thrown it away the second week. I hadn't announced that either. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed, and for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt like mine. I called my son back 3 days later. We talked for almost an hour. It was not easy, and I am not going to tell you it resolved everything neatly because it didn't. And anyone who tells you their hard family conversations resolve neatly is either very lucky or not being fully honest. There was awkwardness. There were places where we talked around the real thing instead of through it. But at some point I said to him clearly and without anger, "I need you to understand what you communicated to me. Not what you intended, what you communicated. That my presence at a celebration I made possible was less important than logistics. That's what you told me." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I don't know yet if sorry is enough. I don't know what the next holidays will look like, or whether his wife and I will ever find our way to something real, or what shape this relationship takes going forward. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that some things don't resolve on a timeline you choose. What I know is this. I sat in a rocking chair on a porch in Georgia with women who have known me since I was young, and I watched the light come down through the Spanish moss, and I felt for 4 days like someone who mattered for exactly who she was and not for what she could provide. I know I changed my will in a quiet office on a Thursday afternoon, not out of revenge, but out of the simple recognition that resources follow love, and love cannot be a one-way current forever without something eventually running dry. I know that when my granddaughter called me the week after graduation to tell me about the ceremony, to describe her walk across the stage and the way her hand shook when they handed her the diploma, I listened to every word and told her I was proud of her and meant every syllable. Whatever happened between the adults in her life is not her fault, and she will not carry it. I know that I drove 5 hours with my best friend and ate shrimp and grits and stood in front of a painting for a long time and cried a little on a porch and watched a river at sunrise, and that those 4 days are mine in a way that nothing anyone does can reach. I sat at the kitchen table the morning after I got back, my reading glasses on my nose, my coffee going warm instead of cold this time. The refrigerator hummed. I had a trip to plan. Harriet had already started the group chat. Paulette wanted the mountains next time. June was lobbying for the coast of Maine. We had a running list going in our phones like a promise we were all making to ourselves. We are not finished. We are not done with the world. We will not sit quietly in our kitchens and wait to be included. I added my vote for Maine. Then I put my phone down, picked up my coffee with both hands, and let the morning come to me. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to pick it apart the way you do when you're still angry, turning it over, looking for the sharpest edge, but to actually look at it honestly, the way you can only do once the dust has settled and you've had a few good nights of sleep and a trip somewhere that reminded you who you are. Here's what I know about cause and effect, and I don't mean this in any mystical sense. I mean it the way a woman who spent 31 years in insurance means it. Plainly, practically, the way things actually work. What we put into a relationship sets the terms of that relationship, whether we intend it to or not. When I wrote those checks for 4 years without condition or conversation, I was communicating something. I was saying, my love has no boundary and no limit and requires nothing in return. I believed that was generosity, and it was. But it also taught everyone around me exactly what to expect from me and exactly what they didn't have to offer back. That's not blame. That's just cause and effect. I participated in building the dynamic that eventually excluded me from a dinner table I had paid for. Not because I deserved it. I didn't. But because I had never once asked to be treated as someone whose presence mattered as much as her checkbook. I showed up as a resource for so long that somewhere along the way, in someone's mind, that's all I became. The thing about dignity is that you have to practice it consistently, not just reach for it when you've been hurt. I had to learn that. At 63, sitting at a kitchen table with a pale cream envelope on my refrigerator, I had to learn it the hard way. What I did next. The quiet phone calls, the lawyer's office, the Thursday afternoon with the notary, none of that was revenge. I want to be clear about that because it matters. Revenge is about making someone else feel pain. What I did was about alignment. I looked at where my resources were pointed and I asked myself honestly whether they reflected my actual values and my actual relationships, and when the answer was no, I corrected it. That's not cruelty. That's integrity. And then I called Harriet because intelligence without community is just loneliness with good vocabulary. The 4 days in Georgia, the rocking chairs, the shrimp and grits, the river at sunrise, the conversation on the porch where nobody told me to keep the peace, that was the part that actually healed something, not the will. The will was just paperwork. What healed me was being in a room with women who knew my full history and chose to spend their birthday weekend with me anyway. That kind of witness is worth more than any sum of money I have ever written on a check. My son said he was sorry. I believe he meant it. Whether sorry is enough, that's a question that doesn't have a clean answer yet, and I've made my peace with sitting in that uncertainty. What I will not do is go back to pretending that being included is something I have to earn. Savannah's degree is real. My contribution to it is real. My presence in her life going forward will be offered freely, the way love should be, but it will not be offered in exchange for being treated as less than what I am. I am not finished. I added my vote for Maine. I have rocking chairs to sit in and rivers to watch and friends who laugh with their whole bodies. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.